have you with us. And Tahiti.
Yes, my name is Tahiti Crenshaw. I'm the Director of Housing Programs at the Community Action Program of Evansville. We're a community action agency, been there for several years, and looking forward to this review.
Great, thank you, Tahiti. Next we have Ryan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Hamlet, and I'm the Placemaking and Environmental Review Manager for the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority. I live from Indianapolis, but I live just outside of Indianapolis in a town called New Palestine.
Thank you, Ryan. And Danielle.
Hi, I'm Danielle McClelland, and I am an independent consultant in community art, performing arts, history, and community engagement. I'm currently in Philadelphia, but I live in Bloomington, Indiana.
Fantastic. Thank you to all the panelists. And then from the staff at the Indiana Arts Commission, Anna, would you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, I'm Anna Tragesser. I'm the Artist and Community Services Manager at the Indiana Arts Commission.
All right, now we'll begin the panel review. This is how the process will work. I will announce the application and ask the first reader to begin the discussion. The first reader will provide their assessment of the application based upon the evaluation criteria and their perspective. Panelists, please note that the applications do not need to be recapped since everyone has read it. Just provide your comments would be great. After the first reader's finished, I'll ask the second reader to present any new, additional, or opposing comments. We're not looking for consensus, just a full evaluation from the different perspectives that you panelists are bringing to the table. Then after the second reader has finished, I'll open the discussion for final comments. Remember, in the interest of time, we're looking only for new, additional, or opposing viewpoints. Now, if a panelist has a conflict of interest for any reason, that panelist will be temporarily removed from the discussion and placed in the virtual waiting room while the application is reviewed. Finally, once the application has been reviewed by the full panel, we'll ask the panel to update their scores in the online system, and note that it's common for scores to change as a result of this broader discussion, and that these scores save automatically. Okay, so that's it for our procedure and how we're going to move forward. Are there any questions before we begin? All right, hearing none, let's begin. We'll start with the application from the Arts Campus Fort Wayne, and the first reader is Danielle.
Okay. I think I am successfully unmuted and talking, so let me just pull up my comments. And I just have to say first and foremost that Fort Wayne is such an impressive cultural destination. I have had the great opportunity to visit myself and see where it stands like at this point, and was greatly encouraged in reading the Soaring Vision, as their cultural plan is subtitled, and was very enthusiastic about the plans that Fort Wayne has in place, the progress they're making towards those, and especially the efforts that they are making towards attempting to incorporate and more fully engage the surrounding neighborhoods into what is very much at this point, and has been historically, an enclosed campus for the arts, based on historical models of that type of development. And so my enthusiasms were about the planned building expansions within the campus, the cultural trail connectors to Headwaters Park, the activation of Freeman Square. And I believe that all of these create a really recognizable and particularly an activated area where there's lots of people coming in and out all the time, doing lots of different things. I was also really encouraged by the list of partners, which was included in the application, which really demonstrates the ways that Arts United responds to and involves smaller organizations. It seems from this application that would be very easy for Arts United, being such the long-term leader and the curator over the campus space, to not be a team player, to not be bringing people in. And the list of partners and the descriptions of their activities really indicated that that was not the case, that they were very inclusive of other groups, and that were in many ways a convener of a variety of smaller organizations. Especially as part of the application, I was especially excited about the Fort Wayne's inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility efforts through United Front, which, as you've all read, seem to be both an acknowledgement in the application of both the original Native inhabitants of Fort Wayne and the waves of specific groups of immigrants who have come to make up the city. And I'm really excited to see Arts United prioritize its IDEA efforts above anything else, because I do believe that the main challenge of this specific area as a cultural district is the fact that it was created with the idea of being actually separate. Like, let's create a campus for the arts, where people are coming in to visit, but then leave. And I think that as our understanding and the development of the way cultural districts can really help engagement and social equity within communities, it has everything to do with creating a space where people live, work, and play all in the same area. And that specifically, because it's arranged around cultural expression, that it is an opportunity for communities to really create a vector where everyone in the community is doing that to some level. Trying to think let me see what else my notes are telling me to talk about. I strongly believe from my background that inclusion of both living space and working space within the cultural district is really key to keeping it a sustainable ecosystem. So rather than the idea of one leading organization or one visionary sort of bringing into the space or bringing into the community this ongoing influx of arts from outside, and thus very heavily curating what happens, that the most sustainable cultural district is one in which the leadership is about convening others who can feed and develop and express their own creative work inside of that space. So the leadership of the cultural district is really the creator of an infrastructure that encourages others to fill it with content. And so economic development and tourism development, I think, really need to focus on making sure that affordable housing and short-term housing and inclusion of a whole variety of socioeconomic levels within the district happen. And Fort Wayne has the challenge that this space was not conceived in that way. It was actually conceived very differently from that. But I do see in this application a lot of really strong acknowledgement of that fact and pointed efforts to breaking down those barriers, and creating the cultural district as a really dynamic sieve where things are moving in and out constantly. So I'll stop there and hear what other people have to say.
Danielle, thank you for all those insights and comments. Our second reader for this review is Luis. Luis, do you have anything to add?
Sure. Not much, because thank you, Danielle. I will highlight some great strengths, which is again, and I will agree with Danielle where I am I'm not super duper fond of compound campus models, because a lot of times that was the original intent, was just like, let's create this for a regional population, and then they go home and there's not a lot of just connection with an immediate community. And I was blown away with, from the get-go, the Arts United's case for the uniqueness in the history, and especially the physical, the built environment with the architecture, and then with their leadership. It is obvious that the 65-year history is just strong and serves the region well. I do think that along a hyperlocal connection, like I didn't see, that's where, if anything, I could have used more information, again, as an outsider, to see how connections with BIPOC communities are fostered. And at some point, I do think the concept of representation at a municipal level, where you only depend on the one voice, irrespective of how awesome the one voice is, and connecting, getting voices from others, you do lose the nuance of having like a smaller BIPOC group in like a big table where these decisions are being made. And that's not a critique of the application per se, but it's much what the application points to, Arts United being at all these tables, right, as the main arts voice. But that just goes to just how incredible they've been working and stewarding this space. And I was equally excited about the future development plans and lower middle income inclusion of 25% into future housing, which is laudable, right? But yeah, I can end it there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Luis. Now we'll open it up for a discussion among the full panel. So are there any new or opposing comments? Feel free to unmute yourself and share any additional comments. And I'll give you just a moment in case you're working with the mute there. Anyone have any additional comments? All right. In that case, panelists, please finalize your scores and update your comments online. And we'll just take a pause here for a moment so that you have a minute to do that before we move on to the next one. Great discussion on this first organization, and we'll just follow this format as we go through the other organizations as well. Don't hesitate to let me know if you need more time, but the second application that we're going to review here is the Goshen Arts and Cultural District. And the first reader on this one is Abby. So Abby, would you like to share your comments, please?
Sure, and I apologize. Someone, of course, decided to start mowing outside my apartment. So let me know if my volume if I need to speak louder for any reason. Yeah, so let me pull up here, make sure I have everything.
Sure, take your time.
Thank you.
And we can hear you just fine, so no worries
Oh,
there.
good. Okay, so I loved reading through Goshen's entire application. You know, as I said earlier, working in rural communities, it's just so truly inspiring to read through the ways that you know, in rural communities, arts are thriving and that's being valued. And so it was truly such a joy to get to read through this application. And so I'll kind of just start with looking at that, you know, arts and culture identity. And I think, you know, one thing I want to mention is just such strong leadership and innovation in building upon your already historic assets that are there. I love how each landmark had an event of a story of then and then now, how that looks, and that connection, and how that was such a huge part of your cultural district is really valuing those historic assets and being able to tell those stories. So I just wanted to mention that. I also, you know, I did see that there was a lot of assets in varying categories in terms of the kinds of arts and culture and programming you have in the community. But I would say, you know, making sure you're marketing those to the community of when do these events take place? Do you have those events going on in the evenings, during the day, in the morning? You know, really making sure you're communicating that. Looking at your cultural development and leadership, I mean, just was truly blown away. And honestly, it was so, all the pieces of the types of programming that you're doing to empower residents and visitors, you know, looking at our artists active in your community, this was all so clearly shown, but also, again, really did show your leadership and innovation. I appreciated how the variety of opportunity in various art mediums for people to be educated on was available. I think that I think this was mentioned some in the application, but I think, you know, Goshen, again, it being a rural community, you face different challenges. And I think because of that, you have created Yet, because of that, you have created such a supported arts experience and education, which is truly powerful and will allow your residents to be able to connect into that. And again, various art mediums. So I was really impressed by that. And I think that does make you a leader in the state because of that. I was also just amazed, again, at that active artist, how many active artists you had in the community, but also just one of the best roles that I think an arts organization can play is their connection across the community and various organizations. And I think you showed that clearly through your partnerships and showing that the arts can be supported, sustained, and accessed well in your community. And so, you know, as I was, you know, looking through this, you're thinking about things like, is there strong potential housing for artists? And that was demonstrated. And, you know, is there strong municipal relationships? And that was demonstrated. And so truly just so much leadership and innovation in that. When looking at things like community development, you had a very strong community plan that integrated all the needs and missing gaps of the community that ultimately your cultural district could support and all the residents. So that I really appreciated the depth and the detail there. And I think that, you know, in terms of kind of that diversity and inclusion, there were times, you know, in the application where I think it was hard to necessarily see where maybe diverse voices were speaking into any decisions. But I do appreciate that, you know, there was a survey that was put out in multiple languages to meet the needs in your community and that people had access to that. But you know, continuing to find ways of how do we provide seats at the table for everyone to come and be a part of major decisions. And so, you know, making sure that that's something that you're focusing on, but also something that's communicated. And so even something like having a translator at meetings or community meetings, so that you can have board members or artists who have different backgrounds or don't speak English, that they're able to come and understand what's happening and be a part of that and have their voice heard. Thinking through things like economic development and tourism development, really a lot of leadership and innovation in this area. You know, just such strong reuse. I think I already said this earlier, but reuse and activation of your historic buildings and preservation initiatives. I mean, the list that you provided, it just shows that, again, you're a leader in the state. You know, speaking from someone who sees a lot of rural communities, that kind of reactivation and preservation work, specifically for the arts, is hard, and it's a really hard role and hard to get done. And so to see that done so well just shows what a leader you guys all are. Yeah, so I think that was something that really stuck out to me. And then overall, just your management and planning for your cultural district was very strong. You clearly have the community support and long-term sustainability in place. And as someone who works in community development, that's something I know that I'm always working with communities on. And so just your overall work plans are very impressive and appreciated, and the survey data that was included in that. So I'll leave my comments at that, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Abby. And our second reader for the Goshen Arts and Cultural District application is Tahiji. So Tahiji, would you give us your comments, please?
Yes, I pretty much agree with Abby on most of the areas of this particular application. I really thought a very innovative format was the No More Children in Cages. The idea you could take something that's so devastating to a particular group of people and create it into an art event to bring understanding was very innovative. The idea of bringing more diverse populations, I think, to their committee would be more, would help the application, excuse me, as well as coming up with ideas, specific details on how to diversify the local economy. What methods will be utilized to recruit specific skilled and competitive workforce? What methods could be utilized to assist potential small businesses among diverse populations? I think also would have helped this application as well. So that particular district can grow, not only with visitors and tourists, but also with the people that live within that community, and keep it more inclusive, inviting more people to that particular area. Those are the aspects that really caught my eye during the review, but I pretty much agree with Abby on everything just about.
All right, thank you for those perspectives from both of you. And now I'll open it up for discussion among the full panel. Are there any new or opposing comments?
I can add something real quick. And Ryan, I saw you unmute also. I'm happy to yield to you. Cool. Just regarding the application on the history piece, that was one place where I feel the application could have gone deeper and gone further back into history. It was all very recent, and for me, that points to just like, you know, trying to get those stories just because it exists, right? Like the current awesomeness that's there, because I love this application, has to be from, you know, more than 20, 30, or even the 50s years ago. And so so I felt that area, I was itching for that after I hit the uniqueness, but just that.
Great, thank you, Luis. Ryan, did you have some comments to add as well?
I did, and I don't necessarily want to parrot other comments made already, but one of the things that I took away from the application was it mentioned a couple times the amounts of non-English speaker residents that kind of came in the 90s. And I would have liked to see a little bit more information about how they're being included in the arts district, or if not only their input, but those are cultures that have their own arts traditions and things, and how maybe those are being fostered or supported throughout the community as well. So it's a little bit maybe kind of similar to what some of the other comments were, but that was the kind of major takeaway that I had from the application. But beyond that, they're doing fantastic things there. We've got a pretty awesome, IC's got a pretty awesome low-income artist facility there named the Hawks, and so they're doing cool things there in Goshen. I'm sorry.
All right.
I
Great.
also wanted to say really briefly that one of the notes that I made was that it seemed like there was more possibility for Goshen to seek funding on a regional or national level, especially given the kind of unique situation that they are in, with such a large new influx of people from a different background than the historical residents of their community, that they're a small community whose demographics have shifted really rapidly, and that they are consciously trying to figure out, you know, how do we make the most of this new integration? What do we do with this enriching of our community? And that there may be, I know, taking the step of seeking out cultural district status is of course one of the steps to do that, but how might you seek funding specifically for the engagement of the new Latino residents in your community? Like what might be out there to fund that? And so I would really encourage Goshen, no matter where your application goes, to really look at that possibility and see what can be done. Because I know as a potential visitor, I would be very enthusiastic about coming into a small town with a rich amount of artistic and creative activity to take place in, especially if that's exposing me to Latino culture in a way that I don't have access to, you know, readily in the middle of Indiana very often. So start looking for other funding sources as well to start new and more innovative programs with that community, especially.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Appreciate all of the discussion here. Very rich discussion on these applications, and appreciate everyone weighing in. So now, panelists, if you'll please finalize your scores for the Goshen Arts and Cultural District and update your online comments, and we'll take just a moment here to give you some time to do that. It's very possible that with this discussion among the panel that you may want to update some things, and so we'll take a moment and we'll move on to the next one. You'll remember at the top of the meeting, I mentioned that if there's any conflict of interest, those panelists will be placed in a digital waiting room. And for this next application on the Kokomo Cultural District, Abby and Ryan will be in that virtual waiting space. So I'll pause just a moment to make sure that everyone is where they need to be. And we're in good shape there. All right, we're ready to move on then to the Kokomo Cultural District review. And Luis, you are our first reader on that one. If you'll go ahead with your comments, please.
Yeah, definitely. Wonderful application. I have to say the strength here is the organization and with the Greater Kokomo Economic Development Alliance, and hence those areas were really good to see, right? But I have to say my one comeback regarding the framing of the district was interesting, because there are so many strengths in the district, particularly when you look at the makerspace, the history with the automobile and the wonderful built environment with the sculptures and the murals, I sensed some confusion in the way to frame that because there's so much to work with. Like I'll just say that I was blown away when I clicked on the global link to go to the website provided and saw all this incredible built sculpture, and I did not get that sense from the narrative. So I say that to say that there's definitely a space to work there with the narrative regarding what I feel is super unique with the history of the automobile, but it not mentioned in uniqueness as much. Where the focus was on the makerspace element, and so that was huge, right? Because then I ended up having to like draw from what I seen from what was linked to, and also what was downloaded. The other space is room for improvement was just like the partnerships and their and I'm trying to get to that. Excuse me for 1 second.
Sure, take your time.
Yeah. So when asked about partners with others to identify resources for artists, there was a list of active cultural assets that did their work, but there wasn't what I sensed. There wasn't a collective move to get them together to actually, look for and identify artists live and workspace. I do want to point to incredible innovation from those partners in their programming, particularly the library, which ends up being many communities' largest cultural asset. And their, like, the human library is an incredible just manifestation, and that takes, but it's also a very brave thing to do because you don't have control over that. And I felt that within that district was very strong, and it shows a lot of innovative thinking, at least from that cultural asset. They scored very well again in community development, travel, the tourism piece, everything that points to the strength of this managing partner was very well. And again, my main advice or points towards the application were more around the first section regarding the actual framing of this space, because it's also super duper walkable. They even like maker, the maker space is only like a 10-minute walk from like what I find was the nucleus, but even the nucleus is bereft with this built environment. There's a good number of like these. So if someone were to just to leave themselves a 5-minute radius around the courthouse, so to say, that in and of itself gives an idea of a really wonderful space. And then if they are brave enough to expand that circumference, it's pretty awesome. But I loved reading about it and just have those quick points on the framing of the space.
Fantastic. Thank you, Luis, very much. Our second reader for the Kokomo Cultural District is Danielle. And Danielle, would you share your comments with us, please?
Sure. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Kokomo, I was so glad to see this application. I'm a huge fan of the makerspace concept, and especially the idea of centering that concept as like one of the core tenets of a cultural district. I find in general that there's a lot more acceptance and enthusiasm and excitement from a wider variety of people about the idea of being a maker or becoming a maker or doing a little something on the side as a maker than the old artist trope, which still I think carries a lot of elitism or ideas of only certain people get to do that. And so I really like the concept of branding Kokomo as a place of makers. It seems very supported by your history. It seems like you're beginning to make a lot of progress in really actually physically building that brand into the landscape and into your activities. The biggest thing I would like to add to Luis's comments were, it may be my own background as a venue operator and a presenter, but I was thrilled to see a variety of outdoor events that featured performing arts, and that there are definitely some performing artists as part of the group that you're listening to and engaging with. But I was really concerned in terms of the life of the cultural district to not see a typical performing arts venue, a club or a theater that is operating on a real regular basis. The idea of a high school auditorium or a middle school auditorium being the primary stage for the community, I think is a detriment, and makes it hard for the district to thrive thoroughly. You begin to kind of run out of reasons for coming to the area without ongoing performances. I was also concerned a little bit about the plans for the economic development and the cultural district plans. They're very clear and concise and named like an actual attainable goal, which I think is always the big challenge for applicants to grants of any kind, to craft and create, like, here's a plan that we're actually going to be able to accomplish. So I was really encouraged to see that. But it was also obvious that these goals and these plans were at the very beginning of the development of a creative space in your community. But I, like Luis, I'm a huge fan of the makerspace and the outdoor environment that you've really developed. And I think you're on a great trajectory.
Okay, so we'll resume our conversation here, and just want to open the floor for further discussion about the Kokomo Cultural District application, and see if there are additional comments or from any of the other panelists that we'd like to add before moving on. And just a reminder, if you have additional comments, to unmute and share those with us. I'll give a moment.
I really liked the creating of the food hubs. To me, that was very innovative, to allow households to learn the importance of healthy nutrition. I thought it was very inclusive and provides a lot of essential information to households, especially if they're on a budget. I really like that aspect of the grant. I do agree with the panelists that more quantitative measurable goals would have strengthened the application. I do like the various incomes residing in the same housing development. I really like that. It's nice to have a mixed income housing development, because it gives people a varying walks of life and understanding of one another. And I think it helps to educate those who might be on a lower income level to understand some of the, as they say, grind that's required to move up for upward mobility. So I really did like that of the application.
Great, thank you, Tahiji. Again, just a very robust, thorough conversation here. Lots of great input. And this is your opportunity, panelists, to finalize your scores and update your online comments based on the conversation that we've had here. And I'll pause again for just a moment to enable you to do that before we move on to the last organization that we'll review. Okay, moving right along, we are going to review the Wabash Cultural District. And for this discussion, Abby will remain in the digital waiting area, and we welcome back Ryan. Good to see you again, Ryan. Welcome back. And our first reader for the Wabash Cultural District is you, Ryan. So why don't you take that away and give us your comments, please?
Yeah, thank you for releasing me from the waiting room purgatory. I'm happy to review Wabash's application. I got a chance to spend a few days there when the Wabash hosted the Preserving Historic Places State Historic Preservation Conference, and I got to see many of these resources they talked about firsthand. But dipping into the application, so starting with their arts and cultural identity, Wabash really punches their kind of vaudevillian past, talking about the Eagles Club and the variety of acts and artistic endeavors that came through the community in the early 20th century, and how they've kind of seized upon that history as their current identity. One of the things that I took note of throughout the application is Wabash is one of those communities that, from a replicable standpoint for leadership in other communities, it's maybe a little bit more difficult for, say, other communities to match what kind of Wabash has. Other communities don't have a Honeywell Foundation, which is very, very, very strong and positive resource that Wabash has. And other communities have not been designated stellar by the state of Indiana. And so there are a whole lot of opportunities and resources that Wabash has had that from a leadership standpoint would be difficult for other people to match. And so it's amazing. They've done awesome things with those, but from when a community is designated stellar or perhaps designated a cultural district, the leadership and the guidance that they can preserve or provide other communities might be a little bit more difficult. And so I would recommend that maybe talking about their stellarness or various other things, that they kind of highlight some other details that they have to offer that could be replicable for other communities. So other communities don't have a Honeywell Foundation. They may very well have a Richard Ford, the kind of driving force for preservation of their community. But all in all, Wabash, their cultural identity is very well established in that region. They're very well known, bringing people in for both the arts and various other things. That kind of leads me into cultural development and leadership. Like I said, that they have a very strong foundation with the Honeywell Foundation, but in addition to that, the Wabash marketplace is invaluable to the community. And so having that in their community since 1981 provides leadership and resources and a variety of other guidance for the district and the community that might be, a Wabash marketplace is one of those things where you can kind of show other communities, here's what we've done, here's the driving force behind it. And I think that Wabash has the kind of leadership and cultural development that they can say to other communities, here's how we have done it, here's how you can do it too. And so I think that they did exceptionally well in this section. Let's see, making sure I'm not keeping over everything in my notes. Yes.
For just a moment, just before you move on, and ask you for a little bit more clarity. Can you talk? I'm going to back up just a little bit more,
Sure.
And then want to hear the rest of your thoughts. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about your perspective on the replicable types of models, and why maybe that kind of characteristic would be a strength for Wabash compared to some of these criteria? Can you just talk a little bit more about why you feel like that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the positives for this designation and other designations that the state has to offer is that when a community reaches a certain level, it's not only raises their own water, but it's an opportunity to raise the region around them or to provide guidance and leadership to other communities throughout the state. And so I think that having that kind of foundation of leadership and innovation is something that's not only important to Wabash, but it's important to communities surrounding Wabash, both within Indiana and, maybe outside of Indiana as well. So to give Wabash credit for what they're doing is one thing, but to give them, to point to them and say, here's something that they've done really well, can allow other communities to ask Wabash, how could we replicate that in our town too? And so I think that's the thing that pushes a community past. They fill criteria very well and then push them into the next level of perhaps having that kind of leadership and innovation that can provide information for other communities too.
Thank you. That's an interesting way to interpret that, and I appreciate that part of your perspective. Thank you, Ryan. Okay, now please proceed with any other comments. Sorry,
Sure.
I interrupted you.
No, you're okay. So as far as one comment that I had, not to keep singing the praises of Wabash, but that's kind of why I'm here, I guess. I think one of the things that Wabash has done really well is they've been an early adopter of a lot of resources that state has. They did pursue the stellar designation. They've done many projects through creating places, the placemaking program that ICDA has. They've worked with Okra and their Main Street initiative. And so they've been a little bit on the leading edge of taking advantage of some of those resources that are available to them and can allow, similar to what I was just saying, other communities to see how they've succeeded in using those resources and how other communities could too. And so I think they've done a pretty exceptional job in that regard. As far as community development, moving on to the next thing, I've sung the praises of them being stellar. Now I'm going to swing to the other direction. So using the stellar strategic initiative plan is fantastic, but I'm not sure that it met all the criteria of kind of a community development plan that we were kind of looking for. I know that the application said that they're working on a new plan now. And so it'll be fantastic to see what that is. I know stellar is so time consuming that once you get through that, then you can start focusing on the future after you've done those other things. And so it'll be interesting to see what the future holds for Wabash, having kind of fulfilled many of the things and projects that they proposed. I would say that there's kind of mention of the limited cultural diversity in Wabash, and what I might like to see a little bit more than just kind of saying, just referencing that would be talking about how they could be more inclusive and inviting to other cultures and other peoples within the community. There's mention of one of the goals of Wabash is to kind of reverse their population shrinkage and maybe being more inclusive or inviting for other communities to come in might be one of those ways that they can kind of face that challenge while also being having more voices at the table within the community. And so I think Wabash does a very good job of saying, here's all the things we have, but maybe talking about here's how we could be inviting to other perspectives would be a good part of the application as well. And I think moving on to economic tourism and developments. I think one of the challenges for plans, and this goes for all 4 communities, is to have plans that have very set projects with goals and dates that they'll be done by is almost untenable for most communities, because it's basically setting up a challenge that's very hard to fulfill and allows people to say, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. So I think that most all of the applications plans maybe suffered or had some challenges with listing projects that we were going to try to accomplish in attainable goals and dates, but I think that's just the nature of civic projects. I think that one of the things that Wabash is very strong about is that they've done a great job of preserving their historic fabric of their downtown, which is the majority of their cultural district. They talk about the Eagles Club quite a bit, and a few other projects, but there is mention of 27 buildings that private investors have kind of preserved. And I'd like to know a little bit more about those people, because if I'm me, I can't come in and renovate the Eagles Club, but maybe I have a small business that I could come in and renovate one of the other historic buildings. And I would like to know a little bit more about how those other businesses were able to do that, because that's something that can bring those small businesses in, the dulcimer makers that are referenced in the application. There's just, they hit a lot of the high notes, and I'd like to know a little bit more about some of the background and some of the mid-level players that are an important part of Wabash's community and kind of resurgence as well. And finally, I think that there is a part of the application where they talk about how one of the important things to Wabash is breaking down silos. Breaking down silos is, you know, a key phrase for any organization, especially government related, but there is a part where they talk about kind of creating one voice for the cultural district. I would caution against maybe using that phrase and say something more along the lines of having one goal and mission, because you want to hear, especially for the arts, you want to hear many voices. Let's hear all of the voices and all the things that they have to offer. And a uniform voice for the arts and culture is maybe not the phrasing that I would particularly use for that. But other than that, it was a very strong application, and they're doing pretty great things in Wabash. But I'd be happy to hear what the other reviewers have to say too.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Our second reader on this application is Tahiji. So Tahiji, if you would please share your comments as well.
I pretty much agree with Matt on all of the parts or the points that he had pointed out. One thing that kind of stood out to me was that maybe access to potential funding and business resources were somewhat limited. That possibly creating a small business incubator to partner with the organization may help to close a funding gap for those interested in creating businesses in the arts. I think it's a way of taking those small town artists or those up and coming artists who want to venture out and explore and really open up their businesses more. A lot of times they need access to capital. And I think partnering with the business incubator and bringing in some financial partners to help those individuals would be highly wanted. Other than that, I don't have anything different to say about this particular grant.
Okay, that's quite all right. Thanks for those additional comments. And then I'll open it now for discussion among the full panel. Does anybody have any new or opposing comments for the Wabash Cultural District?
I'll just jump in with a few comments on, I'm a huge fan of Wabash. In my previous job with the Buskirk Chumley Theater, mentored a whole bunch of students coming through our doors, working in our work study program at the theater, was constantly encouraging those young people to go and visit Wabash, see what they had done with this small town in kind of the middle of nowhere, as far as they often were concerned. So kudos for just continuing the tremendous growth over the last 10 years, especially in Wabash. The the elements that I would like to encourage and sort of push Wabash to look for would be ways in which, as the cultural district continues to develop, to absolutely ensure that there's a variety of cost-effective, affordable housing and apartments and permanent housing in or immediately nearby the district. I think Wabash, more than any of the other communities really that we have talked about, is really ripe for the idea of a kind of gentrified district that's really lively and has a lot of people living and working and doing stuff in a specific area, and yet could very easily create a district in which exclusion is sort of the primary atmosphere, where most of the creatives, most of the service people working in the restaurants, the bartenders in the clubs that might ultimately develop in the area are having to drive in from somewhere else and couldn't possibly actually be there. And whereas I think you can create that environment and have economic impact for a certain amount of time doing it that way, ultimately that model is going to collapse on you, and you'll be sort of relegated to just trucking in touring groups. You won't have an indigenous art scene that's like coming from the people that live there. You'll begin to lose dynamic and individuality and uniqueness for your community. And so like making it a priority, especially from the arts sector into the government sector, to put pressure constantly on how do we keep a variety of income levels in this district available and working inside of this district, and not make it an exclusive playground for not only the rich, but for people coming from outside of the community just to visit, spend a few dollars and go home, especially if the ultimate goal is to grow your community. I know in those conversations that I've had with students about going and checking it out or applying for this job that I see there, their concern is what kind of, there's no nightlife. You know, I could go and see a play, or I could go and see a concert at the Honeywell Center, but there's not a club, there's not a bar. There's that kind of more affordable access of entertainment is not growing. And that is really, really linked, I think, to affordable housing and a variety of income levels living and working in the district.
One thing I could add real quick, and I kind of glossed over some of the benefits that the Eagles Theater have. The application leaned on it pretty heavily, and many communities have a historic theater that either is in need of renovation, or they've done a really good job of maintaining it. But one of the things that I thought was super unique about the Eagles Theater is it's not just a venue, that it's also education space. And so the opportunities for students to come in and learn video and sound production, not to mention the additional kind of meeting space on the top floor of it, is more unique than we just renovated our theater and now have to activate it on a regular basis. And so though the application leaned pretty heavily on both it and the Honeywell Center, I didn't want to gloss over kind of the value and the thought that went into the innovation of what they can do with that space. You know, especially this past year, it's difficult to activate a theater when it's challenging, shall we say, but having that educational opportunity to kind of allows other opportunities to use the same space. And so I didn't want to pitch the Eagles as all, you know, you're leaning too heavily on this, because there's some real innovation, some real awesome things that they're doing with that too. So just wanted to throw that on there, and Daniel kind of jogged my memory on that.
That's great. Yeah, go ahead, Danielle.
If I could just add, Ryan, as you were talking about what items or what methodologies could be replicable for other communities that that Wabash has done. And the model of the Eagles Theater is just incredible. I think that, anything that I can do to send other people and use the Eagles Theater renovation and their model for how it will be utilized in the future, I'm just so impressed with that.
I just want to pop in and thank Danielle for her comments regarding the affordable housing. Piggybacking off of that and Ryan's comments regarding their talk about attracting new people, I felt that section, that specific like narrative was super sobering, because that's hard to write down, right? That to like, that's like a self-reflection from like a city standpoint. Whoever's putting this together, like, yes, there is a decline that's quantifiable. You can see it, and we need to do this. And hopefully, with that comes like the housing them, and not expecting, in this day and age, like to add 2,500 people coming in to work, at certain times. And I was really encouraged with that, because it gave me a sense of hope for this otherwise like really great little enclave. And I have to say that regarding replicability, I'm super impressed that they were able to are able to continue this concept of creative placemaking. In a day and age where a lot of municipalities go by, like political time, based on the elections and whatever comes up next with the next person who's in charge. They jumped on this just a year after the NEA white paper on creative placemaking, and they've been working towards this. And I found that just really cool, right? And the ability to stick with it. If you could stick with it and attract other communities with more diverse, programming, that would be awesome. But I really resonated towards this. My spouse again is from Lake Station. I look forward to traveling to the ones that you can get there next time we go. But yeah, I really appreciate, Ryan, your very thorough review, and Danielle especially those comments on because that gives me a better like on the ground vision of what's there. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Any further discussion? Any other comments? Okay, again, just thank you for the deep, rich conversation on the Wabash Cultural District, and we'll give you panelists a moment to finalize your scores for this organization and update your online comments. And that was our last organization to review. So this does conclude the Indiana Cultural District Advisory Review Panel. The public meeting has now ended, and we say goodbye to meeting guests at this time. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the program webpage in the coming weeks. Panelists, please stay on the call, and thank you to everyone who has been in attendance.